I used to think reactive dogs were simply dogs with bad behavior and weak training. If a dog barked, lunged, growled, or lost control on walks, I assumed the owner just needed more discipline and better obedience work. But over time, I started noticing something that completely challenged that belief. Some of the owners struggling most with reactive dogs were actually trying harder than almost anyone else. They were researching constantly, training every day, avoiding triggers, changing routines, and still feeling emotionally exhausted. That was the moment I realized I might have been completely wrong about reactive dogs all along. At first glance, reactive dogs can look aggressive or out of control. They explode suddenly, react emotionally, and often create stressful situations in public that immediately attract attention. Most people only see the reaction itself. They see the barking, pulling, lunging, or chaos without realizing how much emotional buildup may already be happening inside the dog beforehand. That emotional buildup is something I completely misunderstood for years. I thought reactivity started when the dog exploded instead of understanding that the reaction often begins much earlier internally. Many reactive dogs become tense long before they visibly react. Their breathing changes, their posture stiffens, their eyes lock onto something, and suddenly their entire focus shifts. Most people never notice these early signs. Then when the dog finally reacts loudly, it feels sudden and unpredictable even though the pressure was quietly building underneath the entire time. One thing that changed my perspective massively was learning how emotional reactivity often is. Many reactive dogs are not trying to dominate situations but are struggling to cope with overwhelming feelings. Some dogs react because they are afraid. Others react because they feel trapped, overstimulated, frustrated, uncertain, or emotionally overloaded in environments they cannot process calmly. That realization changed everything for me because I stopped viewing reactivity as simple disobedience. Instead, I started seeing dogs struggling emotionally in situations they did not yet know how to handle properly. This does not mean reactive dogs do not need training. Structure, safety, communication, and management still matter enormously. But training becomes far more effective when you understand the emotional reason behind the behavior itself. A fearful dog and an overexcited, frustrated dog may react similarly while needing completely different support. One thing many reactive dogs have in common is hyper-awareness of their environment. They often scan constantly during walks, watching movement, noises, dogs, people, and sudden changes around them. That constant state of alertness becomes emotionally exhausting over time. Many reactive dogs struggle to fully relax because they feel pressure building around them continuously. Owners often feel this tension through the leash immediately. The dog may walk faster, freeze suddenly, stare intensely, or react to distant triggers humans barely even notice. One thing I underestimated before was how emotionally draining reactive dog ownership can become. Many owners feel anxious before walks even begin because they fear reactions, judgment, or stressful situations. Then when a reaction finally happens, strangers often stare at the dog like it is dangerous or badly behaved. Meanwhile, the owner may already feel overwhelmed, embarrassed, frustrated, and emotionally exhausted internally. That emotional pressure creates a difficult cycle for both dog and owner. Dogs often pick up on the handler's tension while owners become increasingly nervous anticipating reactions. This does not mean owners are causing the behavior intentionally. It simply shows how emotionally connected dogs are to the people walking beside them. One of the biggest misconceptions about reactive dogs is that they simply need harsher corrections or stricter control. But emotional overload rarely disappears simply because pressure increases. In fact, some dogs become even more stressed when handled harshly during already overwhelming situations. The dog may stop reacting temporarily while still feeling emotionally flooded internally. That was another huge shift in my thinking. I stopped focusing only on suppressing reactions and started focusing more on helping dogs feel calmer and safer overall. Reactive dogs often improve most when emotional pressure decreases enough for learning to happen properly. Calmness and clarity matter far more than forcing perfection immediately. Another thing I learned is that reactivity can come from many different experiences and personalities. Some dogs react because of bad social experiences while others were simply never taught how to regulate themselves calmly around stimulation. Some dogs are naturally more sensitive than others emotionally. Busy environments that feel normal to one dog may feel overwhelming to another. This is why comparing reactive dogs to stable, confident dogs is often unfair. Different dogs experience the world very differently depending on genetics, environment, socialization, and emotional sensitivity. One thing reactive dogs constantly teach owners is awareness. Owners start noticing tiny changes in body language, leash tension, eye contact, breathing, and environmental pressure most people completely overlook. Over time, many owners become extremely skilled at reading emotional buildup before reactions fully happen. That awareness often becomes one of the biggest turning points in progress. Once owners recognize early stress signals sooner, they can often help the dog before emotional overload fully explodes. Small adjustments suddenly make a massive difference. Another misconception I had was thinking socialization simply meant exposing dogs to everything constantly. The more I learned, the more I realized overwhelming dogs repeatedly can actually worsen reactivity over time. Good socialization is not endless exposure without limits. It is helping dogs experience the world in ways they can process successfully without becoming emotionally flooded. That distinction matters enormously with reactive dogs. Flooding overwhelmed dogs often teaches them the world feels even less safe and predictable. This is why many owners start using distance and management strategically during training. Giving dogs enough space from triggers often helps them remain emotionally capable of learning calmly. Some people mistakenly see management as failure. In reality, preventing emotional explosions is often one of the smartest and most compassionate things owners can do. One thing social media rarely shows properly is how slow reactive dog progress often looks in real life. Improvement usually happens through tiny emotional shifts rather than dramatic overnight transformations. For some dogs, progress may simply mean recovering faster after seeing another dog. For others, it may mean noticing a trigger without immediately exploding emotionally. These victories sound small to outsiders. To reactive dog owners, they can feel life-changing. One owner once told me her biggest success was finally enjoying a calm 10-minute walk without panic for the first time in months. Most people nearby would never realize how meaningful that moment actually was for her. That conversation stayed with me because it reminded me how invisible progress often looks from the outside. Reactive dog owners frequently celebrate victories nobody else even notices. At home, many reactive dogs are incredibly affectionate and emotionally connected companions. They may struggle publicly while being gentle, playful, loving, and calm in familiar environments. That contrast confuses many people initially. They wonder how the same dog can seem perfectly relaxed at home while feeling overwhelmed outside. The answer usually comes down to emotional pressure and predictability. Home feels safe and familiar while outside environments often feel chaotic, stimulating, and emotionally difficult for certain dogs to process calmly. One of the most important lessons reactive dogs taught me is that behavior is communication. Loud reactions are often signs the dog is struggling emotionally rather than simply trying to misbehave intentionally. That does not excuse dangerous behavior or remove the need for responsible ownership. Safety still matters enormously for both dogs and people. But understanding emotional causes changes how owners approach training completely. Dogs learn more effectively when they feel calmer, safer, and emotionally capable of processing situations clearly. Another major breakthrough for many owners happens when they stop chasing perfection. The goal shifts from creating a flawless dog to helping the dog cope with life more successfully over time. That mindset often removes enormous pressure from both dog and owner. Progress becomes far more sustainable when people stop expecting impossible overnight transformations. Some reactive dogs may always need management in certain environments. That does not mean they cannot still live happy, fulfilling, meaningful lives. In fact, many reactive dogs form incredibly deep emotional bonds with their owners because of the journey they go through together. Owners often become more patient, observant, empathetic, and emotionally aware because of these experiences. Reactive dogs force humans to slow down and truly pay attention to emotional details. They teach people that behavior rarely exists without underlying emotional reasons. That was probably the biggest thing I was wrong about from the beginning. I used to see reactive dogs as difficult dogs needing stricter control instead of emotionally overwhelmed dogs struggling to cope with pressure. Once that perspective changed, everything else about reactivity started making far more sense. I stopped reacting with judgment and started responding with curiosity and understanding instead. Of course, reactive dog ownership is still difficult and emotionally exhausting at times. There are setbacks, frustrating days, embarrassing moments, and periods where progress feels painfully slow. But there is also progress, learning, growth, and hope when owners approach reactivity with patience and understanding. Many dogs improve dramatically once their emotional needs finally start being understood properly. Today, when I see a reactive dog struggling during a walk, I no longer automatically assume the owner is irresponsible. I often assume they may actually be trying harder than anyone else nearby. Reactive dogs are not always what people think they are. Many are emotionally overloaded dogs trying to navigate a world that simply feels too intense for them sometimes. And honestly, realizing that completely changed the way I understand dog behavior altogether.